This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow Cook Eat Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today I'm joined by an old friend who is a chef and a grower and a lover of the countryside and a lover of nature, and that's why we're friends, and that's Mark Diacono. And Mark was on the podcast with me, can you believe it, in April 2021. I mean, that shows how long we've been at this. It was episode 9, Mark. Hello again.
Hello, what a lovely treat to be here, and congratulations, because it's a long time and a lot of episodes.
It's a lot of episodes, isn't it? I'm afraid I can't remember how many, but it's a lot. Yes, well, I love it. And it's incredibly nice to have you here. And today, Mark and I are going to talk about his new book, which is out right now, just coming out, called Abundance. And it is so much more than a cookbook. I wouldn't say it's a lifestyle book because that makes it out to be a coffee table book, which it very much isn't. But it takes us through the year from January to December. And it's living life with food, with nature, in his house, in his garden, on his walks, with his dog, with his wife. And it's a really, really lovely read with very truly original recipes. So we're going to talk about all these things, aren't we, Mark?
We are indeed, yeah. And thank you for having me here.
Oh, well, that's very, very nice. So can we kick off with you telling everybody kind of who you are and how you've got to where you are? I mean, Mark, one of the things that is very funny about Mark is whenever I go to a cookbook or garden book prize event, Mark wins everything every time. It's really indecent. He wins for the photography, which he does his own photography. He wins for the writing, he wins for the recording, he wins for the social media. It's just,
I'm sorry.
It's utterly indecent and a most amazing achievement. And it's very well deserved because it never feels tired, his writing. It always feels incredibly engaged with that very moment. And I think particularly, I felt that with Abundance. It made me think a lot. And I started thinking of recipes that I want to do as the autumn comes and the weather changes and da-da-da. Anyway, enough about me. Let's move over to you, Mark. So tell us, where were you brought up? Tell us about how you got involved with food and growing.
Well, I was born in Southwest. I live in the Southwest, but I had the good sense to wander off in my mid-20s and kind of, go all over the place. But I was born on the coast down here in Devon, and I've always been a greedy little devil, I've always been, while I've been eating one meal, I've been thinking about the next. But I wouldn't say at all that my family were kind of food people, they weren't really cooking extraordinary food. No one was growing anything or anything like that. And I came to it, as I do most things, quite late in life. And I think my revelatory moment, there were a couple of things. I think the Cranks cookbook for me was quite that was a real, it landed when I think I was at that age where, I was becoming more interested in the injustices of the world and, all of the things that related. And I think, I was vegetarian. I was very interested in the kind of politics, I guess, of all of that. And that really made me kind of more interested in creating meals rather than having something that was, more meat and 2 veggie, if you see what I mean, more straightforward. And it was quite a transformational book, that, I think, certainly for me. I mean, and I still return to it every now and again. But I think it was only I'm clear as a bell that the transformer for me was I was doing the landscape assessment of Suffolk back in my previous life of being a sort of advisor on countryside and landscape matters to government. And that's what I studied. And a friend said, "Oh, you're lucky. The mulberries are fruiting, And I was like, Yay. Is that a good thing? I've no idea. And I was of that mindset. I think most people are. If they were that great, they'd be in the shops. And I had this mulberry, and I was so knocked sideways by the flavour of it.
Yes.
It's very hard to explain, to navigate to other people. It just blew my mind. And I was, why aren't we eating mulberry? Why are we eating all of this baggy overseas fruit? And so I knew, and I found that, too soft, they won't go through the supermarket system, so we never have them to buy. And I thought, okay, I've got to grow these. And that was the light bulb that had me think, right, I've got to grow some food. There were other things that rolled up all at the same time, like seemingly delivered by, an all-seeing hand. Your early books really were, again, they were like, okay, this doesn't have to be hard work out there growing things. This can be beautiful and gorgeous and interesting and lively and flavours and varieties. And it was a real eye-opener.
Do you know, I'm going to interrupt you there. I really remember you coming up to me, Mark, because you came to one of my courses. And I really remember you saying to me, Sarah, I'm really learning about growing veg. And that's the first talk I've been to of several where you didn't even mention pests and diseases. And I said, no, because you don't really get them. It's not a problem. And you said, but, all these other courses, that's what they're obsessed with, slug control and onion white rot and all these things. And
all
still to this
work.
day, but still to this day, we just don't seem to get that really. But anyway, so I remember you coming.
Yeah, but they were important things because I wasn't being sort of inducted into this world of sort of Victorian smallholding. I must subsist, and give all my time and effort to this. It was a pleasure and a joy. And discovering Jane Grigson's vegetable book and her fruit book, I suddenly was like, okay, I know what to do with things a bit better. And it was really like a tumbling snowball rolling down the hill. I just started planting things. I started nosing around about things. And it's often really, I know we can tend to give ourselves a hard time about, I wish I'd started this when I was 20 or whatever. But coming later in life, you're a bit less worried about finding your own way. You don't need to follow everybody else. You can take inspiration from. And so I started nosing around about things that people maybe didn't know about. And that would be possible here. So I started planting things like Szechuan pepper and became accidentally involved with River Cottage. Hugh came to film me, because I had things like apricots and almonds growing at the place that I then called Otter Farm. And so I wrote a couple of books for 3 books for River Cottage, ran some courses, oversaw the garden team, all of that, which was, this was really the early days of River Cottage. It was a lot of fun, with lots of bright minds and interesting people.
Yeah. Lovely Gill and Steve Lamb.
Yeah, exactly. Really interesting people doing things differently and creatively and really making that place, extraordinary. John Wright, people like that.
Yes, John, yeah. And Pam
John
the
Forager. Pam the Jam. I mean, who doesn't return to Pam's books when you're preserving? But all the time, I'm doing my own thing still. I was only doing that part of the time. And I started writing a blog. I'd been writing it, I started it in 2002, yeah. So a long time ago, I built the thing because I knew how to do web stuff. And it was really for me to record what I was doing. But very quickly it became, I realised I was starting to sort of explore accidentally developing a voice. You try other people's voice on. I look back at it now, I've still got it, and I read. I'm like, oh, you're trying to be Nigel Slater there, or you're trying to be Sarah Raven there. And you wince because you've got to do your own thing. But actually, it's a good way of doing stuff, And a publisher came and asked me if I'd like to write a book. And so I did, and that was a year. No, it wasn't. It was a taste of the unexpected, or, a lot of unusual things, growing and eating. And really, that's where I've tried to tread the line ever since. 1 foot in the kitchen, 1 foot in the garden.
Or the orchard. I mean, you talk a lot about trees. I mean, one of your big things, and there's a lovely section in the autumn chapters, a section of abundance about medlars. And I mean, quinces are very trendy now, aren't they? But I love the fact that you're campaigning for medlars.
Again, one of those incredible fruit that few of us know, that once you have a window into, and really importantly, have a few recipes that you can turn them to, and if anyone's not familiar with them, they're like sort of small, slightly russeted apples that are kind of open at the end away from where they're attached to the tree, and they open up, and they're usually eaten if not when kind of soft and brown, they're eaten on the cusp of that. If you're using them for preserves and you want some more of the pectin, then you'd maybe take them a little greener. But they're just wonderful, kind of a datey stewed apple kind of flavour with kind of swinging along the spectrum either side of that, a bit more lemony or a bit less lemony. And they're just extraordinary, and they make so many things. I think I may have been sent to this planet to come up with the Medlar sticky toffee pudding recipe.
Yes.
A year at Otter Farm, because it's just brilliant. And if that's all I ever did, I can walk away and go, okay, I was vaguely useful there. But it's such a wonderful fruit, and there are many of them. I'm enthusing like hell about Asian pears at the moment because they're homegrown. They're just phenomenal. But it never stops. There are always some more things to be eating.
Yeah. The other plant that I know I associate you with is ginger rosemary. And, I remember you showing me how to make cocktails with ginger rosemary as well as using it in food. But it's one of your great campaigns, isn't it? And it has got this really unusual flavour.
It's wonderful. And it delivers on the promise and so much more. So many of these things don't, and so many combinations. Nobody wants banana mint, But ginger rosemary, it's like, it works everywhere that rosemary works, but differently and at least as good and sometimes better, So it's great with lamb and roasted veg and rhubarb, with ginger rosemary. But it makes a brilliant herb syrup, as you say, that you either have with sparkling wine, sparkling water, or the Tom Collins of, equal amounts, ginger rosemary syrup, lemon juice, and gin. And it is just one of those brilliant varieties that I think it's become my home rosemary. I would use the kind of regular rosemary now as a change from ginger rosemary.
Okay, good. And so then taking us more up to abundance and the writing of this book, will you talk us through how you've got to here?
But you know what? It was really interesting because normally, you know what it's like with a book. Sometimes you've got a germ of an idea and you have to chase it around the back streets, like someone who's done enough with your phone. And you eventually grab hold of it and you batter it into some kind of shape. I woke up, this wasn't like this. Abundance was different. I woke up one day, clear as a bell, with all of it in my head. And I didn't do anything. I just got up, got my notebook, and I wrote down everything that was in my head. The word abundance was there kind of gleaming like a ice cream van in the sun, it was just like bing. And, I'd write over the course of the year. The crucial bit that was the biggest bit was that I would write it every week. And it was crucial for a couple of reasons. And because I think the idea came partly because it's like the heart of where I try and write, but it was because I was feeling detached from my life. I was sort of looking at it almost in parallel, watching a movie of myself almost. And this idea, it came to me, I realized later, meant that I would, if I wrote it every week, I would have to be more present. I'd have to pay more attention. I'd have more excuse to be in the garden. I'd have more of a reason to be out on a walk. I would need to be in it. And you know what happens with a book, even if you're writing one over the course of a year, it's very easy to have a really intense February and then write nothing in March because you're tied up with other things, and then come back in April. And this wasn't, it couldn't be that. And I knew I'd have to write it every week. And so I started a Substack. Or no, I'd already started a Substack, but this was what really solidified this thing. And if anyone's not familiar with Substack, it's a sort of, this is not doing it justice. It's a sort of like almost like a blogging platform where people can write and it goes out. But at the same time, you're in this global library of other people writing. And it could be, and it's very searchable and it's interactive in the same way that Twitter in the old days was. There's a kind of parallel place where you can chat with people publicly. But it goes out as an email, but it's also visible online. There are 60 million registered readers now globally. Yeah. And you can read anything from before he was attacked. You could read Salman Rushdie releasing his latest book, chapter by chapter. Other people are doing that at the moment. There are all kinds of famous people, anybody, and greatly unknown but brilliant people as well. So anyone from, say, Ottolenghi is there writing brilliantly. But I wrote it every week there, and it meant I had to turn up. It meant I had to pay attention, meant to do recipes, meant I had to take photography. And that became my life, as in, not the only thing I did, but it meant that I was doing it all the time. And it was really like easy. The structure. Yeah, it was the excuse, it was the reason. And this is book 14 now. It changed my writing life. And I would go so far as to say it's changed my life, because I was writing to this global audience that grew and grew. And that has been really a brilliant part of it being a community, rather than just writing it into, into the air. And it was never meant to be a book. It was never meant to be a book. And then partly because I didn't want it to be squished into somebody else's timetable or have any decision makers or gatekeepers influencing what it was. I knew I had to write it as I wanted it. But about 5 weeks in, I had 4 publishers going, "Can we publish this? This is going to be great."
It's wonderful.
So I was a lucky man. But I'm really evangelical about Substack, is that it is a place for developing your writing, whether you're starting off or not, and a place to find your audience, but also a way of finding a way around gatekeepers and decision makers, or putting yourself in a better place to deal with, interact with, appeal to decision makers and gatekeepers. So Abundance, I still write it now. It's like, this is a snapshot.
Yes.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. This is a year snapshot, but I write it ongoingly, and I'll keep writing it ongoingly, because that reattaching myself to, not being distant from, not being too busy for, not being distracted by other things from the season's life. What's happening in the garden? Oh, it's that colted, it's that one, not rather than general noise. It's such a powerful thing now that I can't let it go.
Yes. And so this represents 2024. I mean, it's coming out now because, as we all know, illustrated books take at least 9 months
to create. Yeah. There are a couple that are early, because I think I started it in October 23, so it's got a bit of 23 in it. We've kind of balanced it out, and yeah, I mean, it's been such a joy, and like I say, I can't give it up, which is slightly distressing, because I've got about 4,000 other ideas, But if nothing else, and this is, as you said, thank you for saying it is more than a cook, but there are a lot of recipes in there, 80, 90 or something, but it is also an invitation to anyone who feels like they live in parallel to themselves to maybe figure out a way that life can be, without changing everything, it can be more attached to the place, to the time of year, to the time of day, to the light, to all the micro seasons that, say, in Japan are really wildly celebrated, 72 micro seasons, rather than the 4 that we have here, because it is a life enricher. Yeah. It's no more expense. It's just slightly paying more attention to where you are and what you're doing.
I mean, that gives me a good opportunity to sidestep a tiny bit, and we're going to come back to the book in a minute. But one of the other things that you do spend your time doing is actually teaching people to write about food. And I think you do it with Diana Henry, don't you, who's a wonderful cookery recipe writer. So tell us a little bit about that, is how you got involved with that and what you're doing with that at the moment.
Yeah, so I absolutely love teaching and teaching writing and everything that goes with the actual, the nature of writing and actually getting it out there. So I do it. And I think partly it's because, again, because coming to it late, every step seems a mystery. How do you appeal to a publisher? What do you have to send them? Do you send them a whole load? Do you send them a little bit? Do you need, what's in a proposal? All of those things, who are they? Where do I find? And you may not remember this, but I emailed you and said, no, I don't know if I need an agent. This is 17 years ago. I don't know if I need an agent. And you said, well, chat with mine. And all of those seemingly small things that people do that allow you to find your place in the world makes such a massive difference. And I love it. It's nice to be useful. And so I teach in a few ways. I do, as you say, I do these residential weekends with Diana Henry, where people come from we hold them here in Devon, but every time, usually, 19, 20 people, every time, last time we did one in spring, and someone came from Hawaii, New Zealand, Canada, Switzerland, and every time, there are people from around the world come, and it's very intense. It's very intense. We're not like, we're not going to you write a little bit now, and then you can wander off around the garden for 4 hours. Yeah, it's like solid, all the food you want, brilliant food. Everything is there. Everyone's residential, all of that stuff. And then the other thing I do, so I'm going to Italy. I'm teaching in Italy for a couple of weeks in October. But I also do it. I have this on my Substack, which is again called Abundance. I take people through a kind of once a month if you're a subscriber, you can join, and I do these Zooms, and they are themed each month. So it might be what goes into a proposal. How do you find gatekeepers? What should you be presenting to people? How about developing your voice? How to put together even your own Substack? Because again, it's very easy, but if same as driving a car, if you don't know how to do it, then it's a different game. So it's yeah. So I love it, and it's really a key part of what I do. So yeah.
Great. So back to abundance. I mean, reading it, I picked out kind of 3 themes, I guess, as well as the recipes, which we'll end with. But the first is about growing, which we have touched on. And one of the things I love reading when people are really knowledgeable, as you are, about growing is about variety choice. And there's tons in here about variety recommendations. And somebody who's grown tomatoes for 32 years now, I can't believe that there's a variety called Shimmer that I've never heard of or grown. So the other two, I do, the Costoluto, Fiorentino and Honeycomb, I absolutely adore too. But so Shimmer's straight on my list. But I love the tips. So I just did a podcast with Raymond Blanc a couple of weeks ago. And his new cookbook, which is a kitchen garden cookbook, is full of fantastic tips. And I love the tips that are in this. And will you just talk us through? Because I really, really like using chestnuts in cooking as we go into the autumn. Because we live in sweet chestnut country here in East Sussex, and the woods are full of them. But there's such hard work. And I love the fact. Anyway, you tell us how you get chestnuts to an easily eatable state, because I find them a complete and utter pain to cook.
They are quite a pain. So there's a few things that really help. One of them is choice of variety. So if you've got the opportunity to plant your chestnut, one of the things that you want to be choosing is varieties that have got, large.
Yeah.
You don't want to be faffing around with too much on the small side. After that, so yes, the key thing with them is, I find roasting them is really good, making a little snick in the end. Roast them in the oven. Now,
which end? So the pointy end or the flat end? Or doesn't it matter?
I tend to use the pointier end just because the flatter end can be... because tougher. It's tougher. They're small and faffy enough anyway that you want to watch cutting your hands. So I tend to go the pointy end, just so the steam can get out. I'd be roasting them, and then this is the tricky bit. Is when they come out, you've got to let them cool, but not too much. If you let them cool too much, then the skin will reattach. So you can pop them back in. You can pop them back into the oven. But 20 minutes on a kind of moderate-ish oven, then I get them into a tea towel, and they steam a little, and then they'll peel just enough when they've just cooled enough, and it comes away really well. But like I say, if they reattach back in the oven, just for a few minutes.
It's that tea towel that's genius. I've never heard or read that before. And
the tea towel is genius.
Yeah.
It was. Do you know what? It was accidental.
It was
accidental
because they were
so
really
many
hot.
Of these things they were really hot, and I was like, I've got something to tip them into, and there was a tea towel that I just dried some herbs in it or something like that, and laid out, and I just tipped them in and folded it up and kind of moved it, and then they peeled really easily, and I was like, well, it's the same place I picked them last time, but that works really
Brilliant.
well. And you need to remove the faff from anything that's faffy, and that's one of chestnuts can be a faff, and that's the good bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's why I've resorted, even though I'm in chestnut country, to the vacuum packed, which is shocking of me to admit, but I have. But I'm going back into the woods, and off I'm going to go. So the other theme that I think is really beautifully written about in the book is your love of nature. And I don't know, there were lots of sections that I picked out about. There was one about woodpeckers. There was one about the corvid crew, of which me as a raven are part of. So I just wondered if you'd talk us through your love of woodpeckers, because I just think your description of them is... But you probably don't know, Mark, that they're terribly violent, woodpeckers. Everybody hates a magpie, but actually woodpeckers are here the worst breakers into nesting boxes and knickers of little baby birds. Yes.
Oh man!
So just to disabuse you of your love of woodpeckers.
Well, that's you see now. What this is, but it's interesting because the bit I wrote about magpies is. Because it was a revelation to me, because they squawk around the garden and make a whole load of noise, and that they're going for these birds. And we've been told time and time again, haven't we, that magpies are kind of badly wise, and that they know us, and that we've been told this time and time again. And then when you read a bit more about them, you're like, oh, the reason that it's one for sorrow, two for joy is that they go around in pairs forever, And woodpeckers, of course, I grew up with Professor Yaffle, I grew up with Woody Woodpecker. All of these cartoonly, brilliant, friendly creatures were my pals in my head. And I've always loved them because I think part of it is Professor Yaffle, because they're sort of from Bagpuss, I should say. And Bagpuss is being made into a film. I didn't know this until yesterday. But
very good.
they look, woodpeckers seem slightly homemade, and I really like that about them. The wings the wings are set back slightly too far. All of this stuff. I love the way they fly is like I'm going to flap enough that I sort of go up and along, and then I'm going to probably not do it until I start the dip again. And again, the book, paying more attention, doing Abundance Live, gave me the excuse to really notice what was going on. And then to be like, okay, that's when these birds go. That's when that bird goes. Now I know the difference between a cold tit and a great tit or whatever. Yeah, and it's interesting that some of it comes back to the Merlin app, which has been a kind of transformer for me, because you can immediately go, okay, and then you build up some knowledge. Adam, your husband's latest book, which is just a joy to me. So I feel like I'm building this bird knowledge from before they I used to have it would be like being into music and going, okay, I know the Beatles and I know Coldplay and I know Queen, and now I feel like I'm getting into jazz. It's like, okay,
I know exactly what you mean.
So it's like this, and it's a quality of life shifter. And
it really is.
It's an extraordinary thing.
Merlin is the doorway, isn't it? I mean, for me, I was walking down a path in Scotland about 3 weeks ago, and I heard this really, really high cheep, 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 just so high. And Adam had told me this story that the bird survey people had concluded that there were no goldcrests, or very few goldcrests left in this country, and it's because their song is so high that the people who tend to be doing the bird surveys are in their 50s, and anyone over 50 has lost the higher ratio, the higher defined notes. And so it wasn't that there weren't any goldcrests, it was that the people who were surveying couldn't hear that part of the... Anyway, I heard this really high squeak. So I rushed down the hill and got my phone and put on Merlin and walked back up to this tree, hoping that they were still there. And indeed, Merlin identified it as a goldcrest. So that was a triumphant moment. But it gives you a way in, doesn't it? Without binoculars necessarily. And it makes you get to know bird by bird, because you get to know
understanding.
Yeah.
No, it's such a wonderful thing. I really feel like my quality of life has lifted because of that process of going, what is it? And I don't have to try and remember it to get home and then kind of look through a book at somebody else's description of what it is. I know what it is, and I recognise it next time. I mean, what a joy.
Yeah, that's so true. Right, so let us now get on to some recipes, because in the main, it is, of course, about recipes, your book, and about your relationship to food, and inspiring us to look at food and use recipes that aren't just sort of run-of-the-mill, and that's what I love about it. I mean, why don't you select 2 or 3 and just talk us through them for this season? So as we go into autumn and heading up, maybe we'll finish with a couple about Christmas, but talk us through 2 or 3 recipes, Mark.
Well, I mean, this whole kind of, September, October-y time, I might have been made for this time of year. I find...
Yeah, I read that. I loved you describing yourself as that.
Yeah, I do. Summer I feel kind of a bit New Year about. I'm supposed to have a good time, but I'm feeling like, I'm slightly frying. And so I love this. And I love the fact that we're swinging backwards and forwards all the time between, what feels like summer and what feels like autumn. It feels like half rice, half chips, half John Martin, half chic, I really love that about this time of year. And my cooking right now is kind of reflecting that a lot of the time, I think. So there's a tomato and rosemary soup that I made. It was sort of made really by my wife and I when my daughter went to university. So, in September last year. And it was a sort of accidental soup of, right, we need to do something. We need, it was quite a moment, as it is for people when their kid wanders off into into the brilliant world. And we just had a load of tomatoes that we roasted, but again, with the rosemary was around. And it's the simplest of recipes. And I'm a big fan of simplicity because it means that you'll do it often. And it's a recipe that just, it has leeks rather than onions, plenty of garlic, and just a little bit of cream. It's very, very simple. And the tomatoes are roasted. It all gets swizzed up. And it just tastes of now. It's got the brightness of summer in the tomatoes, but the kind of warmth of autumn with the rosemary. And I hadn't noticed this, but there's an October recipe in the book, again, which is the simplest thing in the world, which is, your classic baked potato. Yes. But at the same time, I wrap up leeks, garlic, rosemary in the oven, and they cook steaming in foil while the potatoes cook once. Swizz all of that, take them out, half them, scoop out the flesh of the potato, swizz up everything that's in there. So the garlic, the leeks, the rosemary, and get it all mixed in together, back in the potato. And it is the simplest, back in the oven for a while and then sprinkled with a bit of smoked paprika. It's the simplest thing.
Yeah, it sounds so good. I do something a bit similar with wild garlic in the spring and Lancashire cheese, but I'm definitely going to do both those recipes in the next week. I've made notes of them and put post-it notes.
Thank you. Thank you. But it captures it captures the now, and it's often I quite like the thing of making, doing a bit of prep in the warmth of an autumnal day, knowing that the cool of the evening is heading your way.
Yeah, totally. The other one that I highlighted was your fig and fennel crumble, because the thing about a lot of crumbles is that they can be quite heavy and kind of sit in your stomach. And I loved the sound of it. I mean, I've got loads of figs on the tree right now. And again, I've got quite a big family weekend coming. I'm going to make this. But talk us through this one as well.
Well, I had some really gorgeous figs, and there are some recipes in there for kind of, salads with figs in them. And I love that, again, this time of year. But again, sometimes you need a bit of warmth and a bit of comfort and a bit of all of that. And it's very simple in that really you sit the fig upright, cut it in a cross as viewed from above, and open it up a bit like those things, used to fold at school where you'd, you'd have A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and then you'd open it like that into its quarters without cutting all the way through. And then this really simple crumble of rolled oats, sugar. It's an olive oil crumble, and fennel seeds. You can use butter if you'd rather, but I quite like olive oil and figs together. And then you sort of pop some of this crumble just into the open beak of the figs, and it gets a bit of time in the oven, maybe 20-25 minutes if that, and the gorgeous fennelly oil kind of soaks a little bit into the figs, and you're left with this. The fig is still there; it's surrendered. It's kind of soft and gorgeous. And
so they're individual in a baking tray, so it's not the fruit under and the top. I love.
Yeah, it's not a big duvet over the cross.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's really nice. You lift them out with a spoon, and obviously too much double cream or whatever sour dairy you fancy. And they're so nice because, again, they're dead simple, and it can go in while you're eating the main course or something like that. And I shouldn't say this, but any leftover make a very fine breakfast.
Yeah, with a bit of yogurt. Great. And you're coming here, which is wonderful, to talk about all these things about your book and also cooking, but also we're going to talk a bit about Christmas, and I'm going to do a few ideas too. But should we sort of begin to round up? I mean, you're coming here on November the 18th. I'm going to pitch that in a commercial manner. I'm sorry, everybody. But let's just chat through. Yeah, come. I picked out a couple of the recipes that I think you might cover when you're here, which are as Christmas presents, one of them, and then the other to do sort of just before, which was hazelnut vodka and the Lubecan, wonderful, those sort of spicy, gingery, Northern European Christmas biscuits. But maybe you'd prefer to talk about others.
Most people are very happy to have alcohol at Christmas. And if it's not alcohol, it can be a non-alcoholic infusion that follows the same thing. So yeah, you picked out the hazelnut vodka, which is a real blimmin' joy of a thing. And I only tried that, I think, for the first time 5 or 6 years ago, but it's become a real favourite because all of the good things about hazelnut flavour come out into the vodka, and it's just got something wonderful about it. There are two blackberry ones that I would really drive people towards. One is Alarino, which is like an Italian liqueur, which is bay and blackberry. as an infusion, which is just a marvellous thing.
Good.
And blackberry vodka. Blackberry whiskey.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And the odd thing about blackberry whiskey is in goes the whiskey, in goes the blackberries, sit on your hands for as long as you can. You strain it and bottle it and leave it a little bit longer if you can before tasting it. And it doesn't taste of either whiskey or blackberry. It's its own amazing transformation. And it's wonderful. Just a wonderful thing. So again, good presents to you yourself or somebody else.
And would you have that as a shot over some ice, or would you have it with some tonic or something? Yeah,
that blackberry whiskey, I would. I mean, it's really gorgeous at room temperature. It's really nice, slightly warmed even.
Wow.
But
okay. Yeah.
If mostly, I would have that. Cold as divorce. I think just out of the fridge and sip it and enjoy it as it gets warmer, because you then get everything about it. It's a real beauty.
Yeah. Oh, well, Mark, it's so lovely to chat. And really, really good luck with the book.
Thank you.
I will see you in the middle of November. And thank you so much for being here and chatting through all your wonderful things, but ending with this fantastic book, Abundance, which is out right now.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been an absolute treat as ever to have a chat with you.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange with me, Sarah Raven, and Mark Diacono talking about his new book, Abundance. Next week, I'm on my own because I want to guide you through the succession of bulbs that we're planting now to give us really fantastic flowers through the spring. The thing about dahlias and half-hardy container plants and bedding plants is, of course, they give you a very long season. Now, you can get the same long season with bulbs, but not from one variety. So it's what the succession is that gives you that easily. So I hope you'll listen then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.